Nia pushed open the door to her Lagos apartment, exhausted from the long day that seemed to stretch endlessly. She dropped her bag by the door and let out a quiet sigh, ready to shed the weight of meetings and deadlines. The soft hum of the air conditioner and the familiar warmth of the apartment should have welcomed her, but something felt off. There was a faint murmur of voices from the living room, and a flicker of movement caught her eye. Her heart froze. There on the sofa was Tay, laughing too closely with Amara, his secretary. At first, Nia thought she must be imagining it, a cruel trick her tired mind was playing. But then she saw it, the unmistakable curve of Amara's stomach, the gentle swell that confirmed everything she had feared. Nia's chest tightened, and a cold wave of disbelief washed over her. She wanted to scream, to throw something, to make the world stop for a moment. But she didn't. Instead, she stood still, letting the shock settle into a sharp, quiet anger. Her hands clenched at her sides, and her mind raced, assessing, calculating. She could feel the heartbreak, the betrayal, the sting of humiliation, but she refused to let it control her. Tay didn't notice her yet, and she planned to keep it that way for a little longer. There would be no outburst, no impulsive confrontation. Nia took a slow breath, letting the fire of anger settle into a focused determination. She would deal with this, but on her terms. And in that moment, standing in the doorway, she realized she was already thinking 3 steps ahead. Nia closed the study door behind her, shutting out the world, shutting out the noise, and shutting out Tay's betrayal for just a moment. The room was dimly lit, the soft glow of the desk lamp reflecting off the polished mahogany shelves stacked with books she'd barely touched in recent months. She sank into the leather chair, letting the tension in her shoulders finally release. The apartment felt empty now, but it was the silence she needed, the kind that allowed her thoughts to come forward unfiltered. She remembered the early days of their marriage, the promises whispered over candlelit dinners, the excitement that made everything feel larger than life. Tay had been charming, attentive, and convincing in the way only someone like him could be. But as the years passed, tiny cracks had appeared. Unexplained trips, late-night texts he'd brush off, the occasional secrecy that she'd dismissed as stress or work. Nia's heart ached as she realized she had seen the signs, but had chosen to ignore them. Perhaps she had wanted the illusion of perfection too badly, or perhaps she had simply trusted him too much. Now, sitting alone, Nia felt the sting of betrayal in full force. The sight of him with Amara, the evidence she couldn't unsee, replayed over and over in her mind. She allowed herself a moment of raw grief, the kind that comes quietly in the corners of a room, not in shouts or tears that draw attention. But grief alone wasn't enough. Anger flared next, sharp and hot, yet she reminded herself to hold it, to let it become a tool, not a weapon aimed blindly. As she leaned back, her fingers tracing the edge of the desk, clarity began to form. She could feel the adrenaline of hurt mixing with a strange sense of resolve. Nia didn't want to react recklessly. She wouldn't storm into a confrontation. She wouldn't let her emotions dictate her next steps. Instead, she would be deliberate. Every memory of their past, the signs she'd ignored, the small betrayals, the sweet moments that had kept her blind, now became pieces of a map that would guide her, quietly and strategically, toward the position of control she deserved. By the time Nia rose from her chair, she had made a decision. This was not a story of loss. It was a turning point. She would process, plan, and act, but on her terms. And as she walked back to the window and looked out over the Lagos skyline, she felt a strange calm. The city below buzzed with life, unaware of the storm that had passed through her home. But inside, Nia felt the first flicker of power returning, steady and unshakable. She would not be undone by betrayal. Not today. Not ever. Nia slipped quietly into the study, closing the door behind her and locking it this time. The apartment felt emptier than ever, yet the silence was exactly what she needed. She powered on her laptop and pulled out the stack of bank statements she had collected over the past months, all the while pretending to herself that she was just doing routine checks. But this was different. This was a hunt. She had learned enough from the glimpses of Tay's phone, the odd notifications, the hushed phone calls to know that there was more to uncover. Starting with the bank statements, she carefully compared them against the transfers she remembered discussing with Tay. Slowly, a pattern emerged, small, seemingly harmless amounts sent to unfamiliar accounts, increasing in frequency over time. Her stomach turned as she realized these weren't ordinary transfers. They were deliberate, siphoning money from their joint accounts straight to someone else. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she kept her composure. Anger mingled with exhilaration. Every line she highlighted brought her closer to clarity. Next came the emails. She navigated Tay's work account, finding messages to Amara that were carefully worded, hiding personal favors behind professional language. The tone, the timing, even the casual familiarity in the phrasing told a story he had hoped she would never read. And then, tucked in an old folder labeled private, She found evidence of offshore accounts, assets hidden away as if they were invisible. The realization hit her hard. Tay had been hiding not just small sums, but serious wealth. They weren't just being reckless. They were betraying her at every level. Finally, she turned to the messages on his phone. Some had been cleverly deleted, but she had her ways. Texts and WhatsApp chats revealed careful planning, secret meetings, and worst of all, assurances of continued transfers to Amara. The proof was undeniable, irrefutable, and detailed. Nia leaned back in her chair, a quiet, controlled smile forming. For the first time since the discovery, she felt a rush of empowerment. She had the evidence, the leverage, and the upper hand. It was a strange mix of satisfaction and strategy. She didn't need to confront him immediately. She didn't need to react impulsively. Tay had assumed she was naive, blind, or too emotional to act. Now, she had proof, and she could plan every next step with precision. Nia let herself savor the moment, the silent triumph of someone who had been wronged but refused to stay powerless. In that dimly lit study, surrounded by papers, screens, and hidden truths, she finally felt in control. Tay had underestimated her, and that mistake would be his undoing. She had all she needed, and for the first time in months, the storm inside her felt purposeful, calculated, and unstoppable. Nia sat back in her study chair, phone in hand, staring at Chaik's contact. She had known him for years, trusted him more than anyone else in business, and now she needed that trust in a very different way. Her fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before she pressed call, listening as it rang, heart steady but mind sharp. When Chaik picked up, his familiar voice brought a small, grounding comfort. "Chaik, I need your advice," she said, her tone calm, almost casual, though every word carried the weight of what she had uncovered. She explained everything succinctly, the transfers, the hidden accounts, Amara, the betrayal, leaving out nothing, letting him see the full picture. Chaik was silent for a moment, the pause letting her know he understood the gravity. Then he asked the right questions. "What do you want to achieve? Do you want this public? How quickly?" Nia thought it through, her mind mapping out the steps. She didn't want revenge born from anger. She wanted precision, accountability, and power. Together, they began to craft a plan. First, they would freeze Tay's access to accounts, ensure all joint and hidden assets were secured, and collect the documentation needed for legal action. Then they would make sure everything was airtight, leaving no loophole for him or Amara to escape. Chaik suggested contacts, lawyers, auditors, and private investigators who could handle sensitive financial details without raising suspicion. Nia agreed, taking notes, already imagining the moves like pieces on a chessboard. As they spoke, Nia felt a wave of clarity and control. This was no longer about heartbreak, it was about strategy. She realized that every moment she had spent reeling from betrayal, every sleepless night, had brought her to a point where she could act with precision rather than emotion. Chaik's calm, logical voice amplified her own determination. She was no longer a victim, she was the one holding the cards. By the end of the call, the plan was set. Legal freezes, audits, documentation, strategic timing, all aligned to maximize leverage without a single outburst or reckless move. Nia hung up the phone and leaned back, the city lights of Lagos stretching below her like a reminder of everything at stake. She felt empowered, almost electric, knowing she had transformed anger into action. For the first time since discovering Tay's betrayal, she smiled. Not a smile of relief, not a smile of forgiveness, but a smile of control. The kind that comes from knowing you've seen the game, understood every move, and are ready to win. Nia rose from her chair, straightened her shoulders, and looked around the study. She was calm, precise, and unstoppable. And soon, very soon, Tay would learn that she was no longer someone to underestimate. Nia held the phone in her hand, staring at the number she had memorized over the last few days. Her pulse was steady, her breathing calm. This wasn't just any call. This was the one that would shift everything. She had prepared every word, every question, every detail. There was no room for hesitation, no room for doubt. With a deep breath, she pressed dial and waited. On the other end, the voice she had been rehearsing with, a lawyer specializing in financial and corporate law, answered promptly. Nia laid it out clearly, concisely, without a hint of emotion. She gave the account details, the transactions, the evidence, and the instructions. Every word was deliberate, every pause measured. This wasn't a venting session. This was action. Back at Tay's office, the phone rang. He picked up casually, expecting routine conversation. Then the first words from the other side stopped him cold. Nia had ensured that the legal freeze on his accounts and assets was activated immediately. Transactions halted, access locked, investments frozen. Every corner of his financial world, suddenly inaccessible. Tay's confident tone faltered. His mind raced, searching for a way out, any way to reverse what was happening. But there was none. Amara, who had been waiting nearby for her usual private rendezvous, sensed the shift immediately. The smug, casual energy she carried vanished. She looked at Tay, her eyes wide with panic, realizing that Nia wasn't just angry or hurt, she was untouchable. Every plan they had relied on secrecy and leverage for had crumbled in the quiet, precise moments of Nia's preparation. Nia listened calmly as the lawyer confirmed the freezes and outlined the next steps. There was no anger in her voice, no trembling from fear or frustration, just control. Every piece of evidence she had gathered, every careful step she had planned with Chaik, had led to this moment. She was executing it flawlessly, and the feeling was intoxicating. After the call ended, she placed the phone down gently, a small, satisfied smile tugging at her lips. She didn't shout, she didn't celebrate. There was no need. The power of this one action spoke louder than any outburst could. Somewhere across the city, Tay was frozen, scrambling, powerless. Amara's panic was growing, her confidence shattered. Nia knew that this was only the beginning, but it was the critical first move, and it had landed perfectly. She stood, stretching slightly, and looked out over the Lagos skyline, lights twinkling like they were cheering her on. Calm and composed, she felt the thrill of victory settle deep in her chest. This was control, precision, and retribution all at once, and from this point forward, everything would unfold on her terms. Tay walked into the mansion that evening with the same casual confidence he always carried, expecting the usual routine. A quiet dinner, polite conversation, and maybe a hint of flirtation from Amara. He didn't notice the stillness as he stepped inside. The lights were dimmed, the music muted, and Nia was waiting, standing by the large living room window, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. For a moment, he thought she looked tired, maybe upset about work, but nothing prepared him for what came next. "Nia?" he asked, trying to sound light, testing the waters. Amara hovered behind him, a smile plastered on her face, but it faltered the instant she saw the calm in Nia's eyes. There was no anger in her tone, no trembling from hurt, just clarity, precision, and authority. "I know everything," Nia said quietly, deliberately. The words were soft but cut sharper than any shout could. "The transfers, the hidden accounts, the offshore assets. Every little detail you thought you could hide, I have it." Tay froze, the confidence draining from his face as the implications hit him. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Amara's eyes widened, the color draining from her face as panic set in. She stepped back instinctively, suddenly realizing that the woman she had underestimated, the woman she had assumed would react with tears or anger, was untouchable. Nia took a slow step closer, her hands folded calmly in front of her. "I've taken the necessary steps," she continued. "Your access to the accounts is frozen. Every joint asset is protected, and the legal action is already in motion. You are no longer in control of anything." Tay's jaw tightened. "Nia, you can't," he started, but Nia held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. She didn't yell. She didn't accuse. She simply stated facts, each one landing with weight, each one stripping him of the illusion of power he had clung to. Amara whispered something, attempting to intervene, but Nia's gaze shifted briefly to her, sharp and unwavering. Amara fell silent, the threat of exposure and total loss finally settling in. The room, once filled with casual tension, now pulsed with a quiet, undeniable dominance, Nia's. For a few moments, neither Tay nor Amara spoke. They simply stared, shock and fear mirrored on their faces. Nia remained composed, her breathing steady, her mind already mapping the next steps. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to plead. Everything had been done in silence, with precision. Finally, she turned toward the window, glancing at the Lagos skyline beyond, letting the calm settle over the room. Tay and Amara were left grappling with their new reality. For Nia, it was a quiet triumph, a moment of undeniable power and control, and the beginning of a world where she was the one setting the rules. Nia called a few of her closest family members and friends to the mansion, wanting them to hear the truth directly from her. She didn't sugarcoat anything. She explained Tay's betrayal, the hidden transfers, the offshore accounts, and the legal steps she had already taken. Her voice was calm, firm, and steady, each word deliberate. She wanted them to understand that this was not a moment of emotional chaos, but a calculated reclaiming of power. The room buzzed with a mixture of shock and admiration. Her younger brother, always protective, stared wide-eyed, then shook his head in disbelief. "I can't believe he did all this," he said quietly, his voice tinged with both anger and awe. Their mother sat in stunned silence, clutching her hands together, struggling to process the fact that her daughter had been deceived but had already turned the situation around. A close friend, someone who had watched Nia grow in business and life, simply nodded, impressed by the precision and control she displayed. Not everyone reacted in admiration, though. Some family friends, people with long-standing connections to Tay, looked uncomfortable, torn between loyalty to him and the undeniable evidence Nia presented. Whispers filled corners of the room, small murmurs of doubt and shifting alliances. Nia noticed the subtle glances, the quiet calculations, and understood immediately what was happening. People who had once sided with Tay were reconsidering, unsure if they wanted to back someone who had lost control so completely. By the end of the evening, the atmosphere had shifted. There was still shock, yes, and disbelief, but it was tempered by respect for Nia's composure and strategic thinking. Those who had doubted her ability to handle betrayal were forced to reconsider, seeing a woman who could act decisively without letting emotion cloud judgment. Even some of Tay's closest allies, who had remained neutral, quietly began to align themselves with her, recognizing the inevitability of her control. Nia watched it all quietly, noting every expression, every reaction, without a word. The room reflected the subtle power dynamics she had always sensed but never fully controlled, until now. The friends who admired her leaned closer, offering support and encouragement. The ones conflicted were left visibly calculating their next move. And the former allies of Tay, now unsure where loyalty should lie, were quietly shifting their stance. When the evening ended and guests began to leave, Nia stayed by the window, looking out at the Lagos skyline. The city lights twinkled below, but it wasn't just the view that brought her calm. It was the knowledge that she had regained control, not just over her finances and marriage, but over the perceptions and alliances of those around. The betrayal that had once seemed insurmountable now felt like the catalyst for a power she had always possessed but had never fully claimed, until tonight. Nia walked into the law firm with quiet confidence, her steps steady, her mind sharp. She had prepared for this moment, every document, every account number, every piece of evidence neatly organized in folders on the table. Her lawyer, a seasoned professional who had handled high-profile cases before, greeted her with a nod, immediately sensing the mix of determination and calm that defined Nia's presence. "Let's finalize this," Nia said, her voice steady. She went over the papers with precise attention, confirming ownership of every joint property, every bank account, and every investment. Offshore accounts that Tay had hidden away were included, their secrecy now irrelevant. The lawyer explained each step as they signed the documents, each signature a formal claim of control, each clause a legal shield against any counteraction. Nia listened, nodded, and signed, fully aware of the weight of what she was doing. As the process moved forward, Nia felt a strange satisfaction. Every account frozen, every asset secured, every legal measure in place meant that Tay and Amara no longer held any leverage. The power had shifted entirely. They could no longer manipulate, threaten, or control her. It was a complete takeover, but done quietly, professionally, and without spectacle. She didn't need to shout or dramatize her victory. The law itself had done that for her. The lawyer looked up, impressed by the preparation and composure Nia displayed. "You've covered everything," he said. "There's nothing left for them to challenge without facing serious consequence." Nia allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. It was the first time in months that she felt fully unburdened, the first time she could see the results of her careful, deliberate actions. By the time she left the office, Nia had full control over the assets and investments she had once shared with Tay. She could make decisions, redirect funds, and secure her future without interference. The sense of empowerment was profound, not just financial, but personal. She had taken back what was hers and done so with precision, turning betrayal into a clear path of strength. Driving back to the mansion, Nia reflected on the journey. Every careful step, from discovering the truth to gathering evidence and making the decisive call, had led to this moment. Tay and Amara, once confident and untouchable in their deception, were now powerless. Nia felt a quiet, unshakable victory settle in her chest. This was more than reclaiming finances. It was reclaiming control, respect, and dignity. And for the first time in months, she felt completely free to move forward on her own terms, leaving the past, and those who had betrayed her, firmly behind. Nia woke up one morning feeling lighter than she had in months. The weight of betrayal, the tension of the legal battles, and the sleepless nights had finally eased. For the first time in a long while, she had space to breathe, to think about herself, and to reconnect with the parts of her that had been buried under stress and heartbreak. She started small, early morning walks along the Lagos waterfront, time spent reading books she had shelved for years, journaling her thoughts without censoring them. Each moment reminded her that she was more than what had happened to her. As the days went on, Nia began to think bigger. She had reclaimed her financial independence, and with it, the power to create something meaningful. The idea came quietly at first, a business project focused on empowering women entrepreneurs, or perhaps a charity to support families affected by financial betrayal and instability. She spent evenings researching, planning, and speaking with trusted advisors, including Chaik, making sure every step was grounded in purpose and practicality. The reclaimed funds were no longer just money. They were a tool to create lasting impact. When the project officially launched, Nia felt a surge of pride. The event was modest, but the response was overwhelming. Women from all over Lagos, young entrepreneurs, and community leaders came to show support. They admired her not just for the project itself, but for the quiet strength she had demonstrated in taking control of her life. Nia realized that her journey from betrayal to empowerment had resonated with many. She was proof that loss could be transformed into purpose, and that heartbreak could fuel growth rather than destruction. Throughout this process, Nia continued her personal healing. She meditated, practiced mindfulness, and allowed herself moments of vulnerability with close friends and family. She reconnected with hobbies she had abandoned, from painting to volunteering at local schools, discovering a sense of joy that had been missing for years. Each day, she felt stronger, more grounded, and more aligned with her true self. Public recognition followed naturally. Interviews, invitations to speak at events, and praise from business circles came as a surprise at first, but Nia accepted it gracefully. She was no longer defined by Tay's betrayal or by the drama of the past. She was defined by her resilience, intelligence, and ability to turn adversity into tangible achievement. Standing in her office one evening, looking over reports of the project's early success, Nia smiled. The Lagos skyline glimmered beyond the window, a reminder of both the city she loved and the life she had reclaimed. She felt triumphant, not in a loud, showy way, but in a quiet, unshakable sense of inner strength. This was her redemption, the moment she proved to herself and to the world that she could rise, rebuild, and thrive stronger and wiser than ever before. Tay stood in the living room, desperation written across his face, voice shaking as he tried to plead. "Nia, please, you don't understand, we can fix this," he stammered, reaching out as if he could grab back what he had lost. Beside him, Amara's confidence faltered, but she quickly tried to mask it with manipulation, her words slick and rehearsed. "Think about what's best for everyone. You don't have to do this," she said, leaning closer, trying to charm, to bargain, to twist reality in her favor. Nia listened quietly, her expression calm, almost serene. Every word they spoke, every attempt to sway her, only reinforced what she already knew. They had no power left. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't argue, she didn't explain. She simply observed the futile panic in their eyes. This was no longer about anger or revenge. It was about walking away from what no longer served her, leaving them powerless in the wake of their own choices. Without a word, Nia turned toward the window. Her steps were deliberate, confident, each one echoing the quiet authority she had claimed over her life. She stood there for a moment, letting the city stretch out below her, the lights of Lagos twinkling like a reminder of everything she had overcome. Behind her, Tay and Amara's silence spoke louder than any protest. They had nothing left to offer, no leverage, no control, no illusions of dominance. For Nia, it was more than closure. It was freedom. She inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of the past lift and a new strength settle inside her. The skyline stretched endlessly, bright and full of possibility, reflecting the life she had reclaimed. Calm, composed, and unshakable, Nia smiled softly to herself. She had survived, she had conquered, and she had emerged stronger than ever. The city below was hers to face, and she was ready.